Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and it's been 233 long days since our hearts were broken at the MCG when the Demons fell agonisingly short against GWS in round 20 last year. Sadly, history has repeated itself, and our Ds have once again suffered a bitterly painful defeat at the hands of the Giants. Joining me tonight to break down another match where defeat was snatched from the jaws of victory in the dying seconds is George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Ben, man. Good evening to all our faithful listeners. Isn't it great to have the Monday night podcast back? But isn't it great to have footy back? Just what we like: wet weather, rubbish, highly expensive food, and Irish dancing. What more could you ask for except for a Melbourne win?
I'll tell you what, I was dressed exactly the same way I dress in the middle of winter. The day before I was wearing t-shirts and shorts, and yesterday I went to the footy rugged up as warm as can be. And also joining us tonight to make us all feel warm and fuzzy after the freezing cold and after the frustrating loss is Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demon Landers. I didn't realise that was my role to bring soccer to the Demon Land fans, but I have recovered. I was incredibly frustrated last night. It was like some weird flashback losing to Giants last year and then Brisbane, and it was like all came rushing back. So, yeah, really frustrating loss. Fantastic performance, I thought, in many ways, but nonetheless, I think, I wouldn't want to bury the frustration for the loss and to bury the lessons from that as well. I actually love the Irish vibe. I went to Golden Plains last week and it was dominated by Irish bands, Kneecap and DC Fontaine. So I had a chat with a mate at the footy and thought we could introduce an Irish vibe. I thought, once we started kicking a few goals, the jig was really quite a sort of very MCC, Melbourne Football Club vibe with old fellas jigging in the stand next to me. It was a great vibe. So I thought we could do something similar, maybe Fairy Tale in New York or something like that. We could sing instead of, like, it could be our version of Port's Never Walk Alone or whatever that song, and it's not Never Walk.
It's certainly better than Country Road, isn't it?
It was quite fun. It was actually once we kicked a couple of goals quickly, it actually brought a bit of energy. And, it was great to be back at the MCG. If you weren't at the ground, and I'm not sure if there's a question about that, there was a bit of chat on Demonland about only 23,000 people turning up. I thought that was a fantastic crowd, to be honest, and said so at the ground, considering how awful those conditions were. Like, if you weren't at the ground, it's hard to get a full appreciation of just how unpleasant it was, particularly when that rain started coming down. And it looked fairly clear. I watched half the replay just before. First half, I only watched the first half. It looked like pretty good conditions, but a lot of rain had fallen preceding that match, so it was pretty slippery. The other thing that's worth noting, even though, it's a bugbear, of course, is our accuracy, but it was really, really tricky wind towards Punt Road end. Like, that was even though the wind, it looked for all the world like the wind was going that way, and Toby Green picked that way to go in the first quarter, presumably to kick with the wind as you do, because that's the way the flags were going. It appeared to be easier to kick towards the Ponsford stand than the other end. So, but yeah, it was great to be back at the MCG, it would have been great to get the 4 points, but we've got a lot to talk about.
I must agree. 23,000, which I'm not sure if there actually were 23,000 there, but obviously there were.
It felt like it. I was actually pleasantly surprised. I thought the noise was pretty good too. I mean, the F1 was on. The weather was terrible.
Well, that's what
Sunday afternoon, 3:00 in Melbourne.
Everything was going against getting a decent crowd. One, GWS, Formula One, shit day, terrible weather. So, you take 23,000 any day of the week.
Yeah, I think somebody pointed out that Richmond played GWS last year at the equivalent round, got 19,000 through the gate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit over that criticism, Melbourne. Sure, maybe we're not as loud and passionate as other fan groups, but, I was pretty loud. I was pretty passionate as the rain was howling down in my blue poncho. So, I reckon that's a bit, I'm a bit over that criticism of the D's, to be honest. And AFL haven't done as many favours in that space either, starting us with the Giants in our next home games against the Suns.
Yeah, and then North Melbourne.
In the middle, yeah. Well, I'm not going to bag them, but...
but it's going to be 3 low crowd drawing games in a row. Effectively,
you got to earn it. So if we want to get the big draws, we've got to win, and people have to go to home games. All right. Each week, I invite our loyal listeners to support the podcast by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We truly appreciate your feedback, and as a token of our gratitude, we do give a well-deserved shout-out to those who take the time to share their reviews. And Red and Blue Ripper writes, if you're a diehard D's fan, the Demonland podcast is a must-listen. These guys know their stuff, break down the games brilliantly, and bring a mix of passion, analysis, and humour that keeps me coming back every week. Whether we're flying high or cursing the footy gods, they capture the true spirit of the Melbourne Football Club. Love the fan interaction too. Feels like a big Demon family. And Maxed Out writes, like Gorn in the Ruck, the Demonland podcast dominates the footy chat every week. No fluff, just insightful, passionate and entertaining discussions about everything Melbourne. Whether it's match reviews, selection dilemmas or deep dives into our premiership hopes, these guys cover it all. If you bleed red and blue, this is the pod for you. Well, thanks for those great reviews, Red and Blue Ripper and Maxed Out. Keep that feedback coming. Simply leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, and we will give you a shout-out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter and you want to leave feedback, ask a question or share a comment for the show, you can do so under our weekly podcast post or just slide into our DMs. And as I always say, don't worry, we won't read out your full name on the air. And you can download and listen to the Demonland podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, or your favourite podcasting app. And in addition, you can also watch and listen to us on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And you want to connect with other passionate Demons fans? If you haven't checked out our Demonland forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up, join in the conversation with fellow supporters from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. And in addition to posting questions or comments for this show, you'll find endless discussions on all things Demons. If you want to jump on the air tonight and have your say on any of the topics that we're going to be covering, give us a call on 03 9016 3666. That's 03 9016 3666. I'll answer, I'll put you on mute, I'll bring you on when there is a break in the conversation. You can also give that number a call anytime during the week and leave us a message and we'll play it out on the show. I usually say now, if you're listening to us live, head to the chat room. But at the moment, our chat room is down because we've removed all third-party apps in preparation for an upgrade. I don't want to talk about it because it's consumed my life for the last couple of weeks. We do go live every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. So if you want to catch the show as it happens, head on over to demonland.com and tune in. I'll get straight into the match overview, guys. In a thrilling round 1 match at the MCG, the Melbourne Demons were narrowly defeated by the GWS Giants by 3 points. Debutant Matthew Jefferson made an immediate explosive impact, scoring his first AFL goal just 15 seconds into the match, setting an early tone for the Ds. In a wet-weathered arm wrestle, GWS gained the ascendancy and momentum, taking a lead at the first 2 breaks before the Demons surged in the third quarter, kicking 3 goals in 4 minutes. Caleb Windsor, Tom Sparrow and Jake Bowie were instrumental during this period, helping the Ds reclaim the lead. And despite leading for almost the entire last quarter, the Demons conceded 3 goals to 1, and a goal to GWS's Lachlan Keefe in the final minute resulted in the 3-point loss. Melbourne captain Max Gawn delivered a standout performance in the ruck, recording 24 disposals and 46 hitouts, asserting his dominance in aerial contests. And returning for his first match since King's birthday, our dynamic midfielder Christian Petrarca was instrumental, amassing 27 disposals and booting 2 goals, illustrating his influence across the ground. And after a full pre-season, Clayton Oliver reminded us what a prolific ball winner he is, being active throughout the match, collecting 30 disposals and providing consistent drive in the guts. 2-time All-Australian defender Stephen May was a late withdrawal due to a fractured larynx sustained at training. He was ably replaced by Tom McDonald, who slipped seamlessly into his role in defence. Post-match, Melbourne's coach Simon Goodwin expressed optimism about the team's performance, especially highlighting the contributions of the new recruits. He emphasised that despite the loss, the team is on the right path and there are valuable lessons to be learned from the game's closing stages. While the Demons faced a heartbreaking loss, the emergence of new talent and periods of strong play provide a positive outlook for the upcoming season. B-Man, do you have anything to say before we go into your stats files?
Just a quick thing. It was, if you haven't listened, I listened to the presser today. Also, Goody did this thing. I hope it's going to be a weekly thing. I presume so, from his kitchen. His wife had prepared spag bowl and he was about to sit down and he said on the vid, have you seen it?
I didn't know. I got the message in on my phone. That's a message from Simon Goodwin, but I was still in my Sukli Lala phase. I didn't want to watch it.
I mean, I presume they're going to do it every week, and if so, it's great. He was on the Sunday last night in his kitchen doing I don't know, not on Instagram or any of those social media things. So I guess it's like a 2 video chat, and he talked about the match and what we did well. Pretty brief, only went for 90 seconds, but then showed his kitchen table where he was about to sit down after dinner and do 4.5 hours of coding going through the match, which is, just shows the life of an AFL coach, doesn't it? Does a full day, full week, coaches all of that stress and pressure, and then sits down for 4.5 hours and codes, which goes through every interaction and makes comments, and that's the stuff that they use for the player after, when they review the match with the players, both individually and collectively. But also his presser was interesting, but the presser I'd recommend people watching is, if you want to get a handle on what other clubs think of Melbourne, is Kingsley's presser. It was excellent. And he was asked explicitly or directly about how did he rate Melbourne? He was really super positive about Melbourne. The short version was he expects Melbourne to be one of the teams at the top. So it's well worth watching. Just quickly, where I was sitting, so not at the Ponsford, I've been sitting on the wing above the interchange bench. And so this year their board information's changed, and it's great. Quarter time, the headers on the board now that they show the players. I didn't get them all, but these are the ones that I caught. So spoils, and at quarter time, AJ had one, Xavier Lindsay had one, and Chandler had 3 tackles. Celebrate things. AJ was in there. Seals, I have no idea what seals are. Hunt ball, T-Mac was highlighted, his hunt for the ball, and Mark's opponent, and BTA defence. I've got no idea what BTA defence is. So I'll track that. That was fascinating to look at as they wrote that, and they were writing that through the match, so I was able to track that through the match. So good spot.
I think I know what the BTA is. It's the bin man tricking analysis. So that's an in-joke to trick you when they listen to your analysis.
Yeah, right. Well, so it was interesting, the messages that they reinforced to the players, and Spoils was obviously focus going in as to bring the ball to ground and spoil, and Chandler was really highly. He had 3 at quarter time, and I'll speak about it in a sec with his pressure. So, really, it's just interesting the messaging they give the players, and how much focus there is on the key messaging for the players. So, stats file. So I haven't got my stinger.
Well, before you go into the stats files, we saw the return on the Demonland on the podcast thread we saw the return of the Pearl. He's of course your nemesis. You think it's George? I'm not convinced. And he had the following to say: "Look at Wheelo's stats again against my better judgment. Could not find a table indicating acts of poor decision making. An analysis of this data would save Binman going to all the trouble of presenting data that demonstrated that we should have won. Well, I'll probably listen anyway." So this might be a new season, but the Pearl is still thinks that your stats files are hogwash. So before you take it away with your stats file, Binman, you have the right of reply if you would like to.
Right of reply. Well, Pearl, he's reshaped the stats file. So I've taken on board his 360-degree feed, or it's really 180-degree feedback, isn't it? Yes. But I'm just curious, he wants me to analyse the data about acts of poor decision-making. But that's very stat-heavy sort of stuff, Pearl. So you're right in my wheelhouse. It's interesting because there is lots of data that answers that question, and I'll touch on some of them in a second, not least of which things like clangers, disposal efficiency, kicking efficiency, turnovers, all of that feeds into exactly that, acts of poor decision making. And to be honest, it's a really critical data point, one that both Goody and other coaches regularly raise into how quick they are to know that information. I heard what's his name, Uze, like he was aware of the expected score at half time in that match against Carlton, and went on to, of course, they famously went on to win that match. But he was making that point about expected score at half time,
and at the end of the game as well, and at the end of the game.
I mean, so that's how top of mind it is for them. So the good, the bad, the ugly, and the curious. But before I jump into that, I wanted to talk just really briefly, because I'm going to do this through the year, is touch on player ratings. So the player rating system developed by Champion Data, I think, is by far the sort of best guide for analysing or assessing players' performance in a particular match. Yes, it's got its limitations as a model. It was developed, by the way, for the clubs because they wanted a way of determining performance levels. So it's got its limitations, obviously. For example, it assesses the scoreboard impact of each direct action, but not indirect action like corralling or running to defensive running, meaning it disadvantages key position players. That's why they always seem to be lower on the rating scale, and it disadvantages role players because it only picks up sort of direct action. So, and in of itself, it's not the be all and end all, but it provides a really consistent way of measuring and analysing performance levels that I think really mitigates confirmation bias, and it really mitigates this sort of sense of the eye test, that vibe-based approach that so many pundits and fans sort of take to the way they assess players' performance. So, and it's also particularly useful when comparing players playing similar roles. And so there's a question about Fritter later, and we can look at Fritter's rating for the match compared to our other high half forwards, Sparrow, Chandler, Anderson, and Harry Sharp. So just really, really quickly, the short version of how they determine the points for a player rating is it's a measurement of direct impact each player has on a game through their actions that affect either the ball or the ball or ball carrier, expressed as scoreboard impact. So each action they do, each possession they have, how does that impact positively or negatively on the scoreboard? To get this measurement, 3 factors are considered for each of those actions: the location of the ball on the ground before and after the action, the situation before and after the action, and the difference in next expected scores value before and after each action. Now, that's a short version. I'll post in the stats file thread that I've just created on Demonland a more sort of full of version of that. So as a way of thinking about it, so actions that increase a player's team chances of scoring, example, taking possession, moving ball forward, give positive ratings, and actions that decrease those chances of your team scoring, example, turning it over, missing shots at goal, which is what Pearl's point is. There is a measure for this, Pearl, and this sits right in this in player ratings, give negative ratings. So in one of the quarters, for instance, Fritter had negative 1.8 or something or other. The player rating each player gets at the end of the game is the sum of all of those ratings. So to give a feel of what a really good game looks like, 20 is sort of the elite benchmark. The highest rated player in a grand final win was Lachie Neale, for instance, with 21.5. I think this is wrong, but the only players to average 20 in a season with minimum 15 games are Gary Ablett Jr. in 2012 and 2014, Dangerfield in 2016 and 17, and Dusty Martin in 2017. And I think Maxi has done that once since. I think he averaged 20. But it just shows that to average 20 over a season is incredibly difficult. So 20 is the benchmark. So I say that by way of just giving context for the top-rated players in this game. The top 5 were Maxi Gawn, 19.2, and this year. So if you want to look at all these data points in detail, there's a thread on Demonland called Stats File 25. Willow rating, big shout out to Willow for these numbers. It's a fantastic site. And what he's done this year, which is great, is put the player ratings for each quarter. Maxi was our top rated player at 19.2. Christian Petrarca was next, 16.8. Tom McDonald had I think this would be, I haven't checked, but I reckon this would be close to a career high, 16.4, which is a phenomenal game of footy. And what I'd really like to highlight for T-Mac was 5.6 points in the first quarter and 4.7 points in the last quarter. By comparison, Track had 1.5 and Maxi 1.4 in that last quarter. So Tommy Mack, he ran all the way through the line. Next, fourth was Tommy Sparrow. Just about one of his best games for a long, long time, I reckon, 14.3. And the top five was rounded out by Jake Lever with 13.1. And just behind him was Petty. And here's a real surprise. I was surprised, was Kay Chandler. He was next with 12.2. Down the bottom, Langford, no surprise because he only played the one quarter, but it was not too bad, 3.2 player rating for that quarter. By way of comparison, Howes, who came off, he was subbed off. He played 3 quarters and only had 3.6 for the match. And this one was a real surprise. Harry Sharp right down the bottom at 4.4 with Fritter, who didn't have a good game. All right, so the good last week, in lieu of having no podcast, I did a preview of the game on Demonland, and I'll use that preview to frame the stats files this week and my good, bad, ugly, and curious observations. The key points in the preview was that I think it's a myth the wet conditions is a leveler in terms of skills. So the Giants' superior foot skills means the weather advantages them on that front, and I think we really saw that in the last quarter. The weather also favours the Giants in terms of their fleet of small to medium forwards, which, as I pointed out, I think is a major weakness of ours. Covering such players is really problematical for us, and that was really exacerbated by not having McVie. We also lack such players in our forward line. No Cos made that a huge problem for us, and I think that our ability to meet that challenge was, in my view, but before the game would decide our fortunes, and I really think it did. On the plus side, there'll be more stoppages, plays to our strength. Track, Clary, Viney, Langford and Sparrow will all love the conditions. And I just think, as we saw the player ratings, they all did well, although Viney, actually, Clary only was 8 points, I think. Briggs not playing, we had advantage in the ruck, so I expected us to win the clearance battle. As always, it's not about winning the clearance count, but winning the scores from clearances. So with all of that in mind, I felt like that going into the match, the key stats for us to win, I think we would need a positive differential in the following stats. Pressure, which is just about pressure and contest, about the most important stat in footy. Only the Pies in 2023 regularly won games with a negative pressure differential. Scores from turnover absolutely killed us this year, and we simply can't afford to lose that stat going into this game against the Giants. Scores from stoppages, we had to take advantage of our likely clearance dominance. Scores from defensive halves, the Giants smashed the Pies for that stat last week. I think they scored 10 goals from the defensive half, just an absolute mauling. We couldn't no way we're going to win that game of footy if we let the Giants do that to us. Uncontested marks, we really had to make sure that we didn't let the Giants pull us apart with a heap of uncontested marks in the way we did, the way they did to the Pies and the way they like to do. And I noted in that preview that I was just discussing then, the pre-match preview, that I expected that we would play the way we played against Freo, and that's in fact what in that practice game. In fact, that's what we were practicing. Lots of uncontested marks in our halfback, across the halfback line, and going across laterally across the ground, waiting for an option up the field, and I think we did that really well. Tackles inside defensive 50, I thought would be really critical given the conditions and our fitness. So the Telstra tracker really is the only sort of publicly available data that gives you any sort of insight really into fitness. And the best is the top 5 different covered repeat sprints and speed. And when at our fittest, we dominate them. And the last one I thought was key was accuracy. And I don't need to say more about that. So using that to frame my thinking about the good, the bad, and the ugly and the curious. The good scores from stoppages, as I said, raw clearance numbers are important in the sense that teams get territory winning clearances, so that's really helpful. As Goody noted in his post-match presser, or perhaps in that video from his kitchen, that was a key factor in the last quarter, as the Giants really dominated territory in that quarter. I think it was 58-42. But for us, the key clearance-related stat, as I noted, is scores from clearances. We won scores from clearances by 18 overall. The only thing Goody won't be thrilled at was they scored one more point from clearances from around the ground stoppages, including 2 of their 3 last quarter goals. And I think that we'll talk about that a bit later, but I think AJ was a factor in that because Maxi was off the ground for heaps of time in that last quarter, I thought. Uncontested marks, I said that was going to be a big factor. Plus, we were plus 21 for uncontested marks. And I think that's evidence of Goody's strategy of using those short kicks. But it took the ball away from them, and it really mitigates their advantage over us, which is their sort of outside leg speed. And I thought that was tactically a really good move from Goody, a really huge one for us. I think this was probably our best stat, our best good stat, if that makes sense, was scores from defensive half. They smashed the Pies, as I said last week. I think they scored 10 goals from their defensive half. Well, they only scored 26 points in this match, unfortunately, including that goal that won them the match. But we only scored 7 from our defensive half, sort of indicating our struggles to transition the ball up the field. But nonetheless, we only gave up 26 points in that game from defensive half. +1 for tackles inside 50 was positive, and I was a bit surprised at that number. And it's worth noting that Swallow, Chandler and AJ were 2nd, 3rd and 4th respectively for most pressure, with Henderson also applying pretty good pressure as well. So that's our forward line. And funnily enough, this really did surprise me. Jeffo wasn't actually too bad in terms of the pressure he applied. He was mid-table with 27 pressure points, only a tick below track and above players like Sharp, Salem and of course a number of others being mid-table. Finally, in the good contest, the Giants won post-clearance disposal by 30.6 last year. They were number 1 in the AFL last year by so a long way apparently in the post-clearance disposal, which is hugely important. But we beat them in that stat by 20, so that was huge for us, and that's really key to when we're playing well, we win that stat.
Can I just interject? I saw an article saying. So you said that stat, but they had a stat last year. They were one of the worst clearance teams last year. And did they smash us in clearances?
They didn't. Well, again, it's increasingly in clearances are a useless stat because it's really about scores from clearances, except for territory, and they really dominated territory. We were up 55-45 for the match until the last quarter, and that was 58. So it ended up being 51 to us, 49 for the match for forward half and back half, and but they really got on us in that last quarter, as Goody mentioned. So yeah, they're not a strong clearance side, but it's really, again, it's about scores from clearances. But it's also worth noting, again, we still bring one less to the contest. So we go into almost every stoppage one player down. So we're almost bound to lose our around the ground stoppages. So I think that's worth noting. But they were good in the last quarter, weren't they, in terms of that? So in the not too bad, our team pressure. So I said for me that was the number one most important stat. We've got to win that pressure. It ended up being 189 to 190, the pressure rating. So a really high pressure game. I thought we were terrific for most of the match. We were 191 in the last quarter. So no, we didn't turn up our toes. We worked really hard right through the match. I felt like they were benefited from having played a match already, and maybe we were gassed. Certainly Clarity was running up and down on the one spot near the end. But in that last quarter, they were 203 to 191. 191, 200 is apparently considered elite. That's the sort of the benchmarks. 191's not too bad, but they were 203. So 12 more pressure points in that last quarter and 9 more in the third quarter. So they kept going all the way through to the end of the match. But our pressure was okay, really, 189 to 190. Again, though, as I said, it's going to be critical. We're not going to win if we lose that stat, and we didn't. The bad scores from turnover. Again, this could have almost been in the ugly. We averaged 40.8 points from turnover last season, and we conceded an average of 48.7 points. We only managed 29 points from turnover, kicked 4-5. They scored 15 more points than us, 6-8-44 on turnover. With 15 points, we only lost by 3 points. So we were minus... Another bad, we were minus 12 for stoppage clearances, as we're talking about. They only scored 1 more point than us. Despite trailing the clearance counts by 13, we outscored the Giants by 18 points from that source. So really that just goes to that point it's about scoring. I talked about it being a big factor in that last quarter, however, winning territory 58, that allowed them winning the stoppages in the last quarter. I haven't broken it down, but I reckon it was AJ had not a great last quarter in many ways, and I think that was a big factor, is that he did a fair bit of rucking in that last quarter. And I'm pretty sure they scored two of their three goals they scored in the last quarter were from stoppages. So that was not great. So we really have to get that differential to basically level or B plus for turnovers. And when we're not going to win many games. That's such an important stat now. The ugly, again, I think I keep coming back to it, is accuracy. We missed some very gettable set shots. I think, generally our field kicking was all right. Our expected score was 81.8. Theirs was 73.9. So an expected score, we scored 8 more points than them. But it was the set shots that really hurt us. So we had 11 set shots and managed 1 4 and 1 on the full for only 10 points from our 11 set shots for 9.1% accuracy. We should have scored. Expected score from them is 27.8, and we only scored 10. So that's just shocking. They had 9 set shots and scored 5-3 from those set shots, 55.6% accuracy, right bang on. The expected score from that is 32.5, so they were just slightly above, and that's the game right there. That's the match. They won it because their set shots were more accurate. 1-4 from 11 set shots with 1 on the full is simply not good enough, and that's why we lost the game, really. That's the main reason we lost that game. And, fair play to, we had a set shot. AJ had a set shot and missed it, went up the other end of the ground. And I know we'll unpack that, but went up the other ground and fair play. Keith nailed it. Beautiful set shot. Good kicking is good football. I don't know what you do about that. It was very, very tricky win going to the punt road end, but 1-4 from 11 set shots is as ugly as it gets. And just finally, the curious was, Andy, you had something to say about this on Demonland, was the number of debutants. Is that the most ever, or for a non-franchise game?
Well, it's a non-franchise, and obviously 1897 aside, and 1925 when other teams came in.
And probably post-war.
Yeah, so it's definitely in the AFL era, and as I said, not including the inaugural sides. 2 other teams, Richmond in round 1 93 and Collingwood in round 1 95, also had 5 debutants, and we had 5. The 6 isn't counted as the debutant because he's played AFL.
And it did bring a remarkable energy, but it's absolutely worth factoring in because, Henderson and AJ at least are probably, they're grown men and, and have done pre-seasons at VFL level, and Henderson had been at the Eagles, I guess, and although only just, so and I thought Henderson played remarkably well, but the other, 2 of them are just having their first pre-seasons in Langford and Lindsay. So, a young side as well, even above our debutants. We had a lot of young players in that side. So, round 1's tough for all players, but particularly players have only had 1 or 2 pre-seasons under their belt. But I thought it brought a fantastic level of excitement to the match.
I think also importantly, it showed who they would have otherwise been replacing, that these guys in their first season, in a couple of cases, first pre-season, are able to go straight into the side ahead of a lot of others. And I think that gives an indication of some of the depth that we haven't got. We've got people playing at Casey level who've been around for quite a number of years, and they weren't selected or seem to have any value. So it's good that we've got these quality players now.
They seem to have no value, but I take the point. But too, in terms of the style of play we want to play, like Lindsay, that's why I was saying Lindsay was a lock ages ago because of his skill level. Like he's got exactly what we need.
We'll talk about that in a sec.
Yeah,
we'll talk about them in a sec. We've got a question coming up about we're going to go through one by one all the debutants, so we'll get into that. So let's get into our listener questions quickly. We've got El Diablo who says, when are we going to finally fix our skill issues? We have a few highlights and they are very sparse around the ground. And I think El Diablo is being overly harsh. Conditions were atrocious. I do think that they played the conditions a bit better than us, and perhaps, if anything, the conditions helped us in narrowing the gap of the skill level. Like you mentioned it before, Big Man, saying that the the wet won't make them better, but I think maybe it sort of brought us closer to them. But I still think LDW being overly critical, given the wet ball, George, can we make a judgment call on our skills alone based on a game played on a soggy pitch?
I totally agree with what Bin Man said about this. Firstly, GWS would have been my pick for one of the two teams to play off in the grand final this year. They should have been there last year. They've actually increased the talent on their list from last year, and they've got people like Finn Callahan now on the field. If he hasn't got 6 Brownlow votes already, I would be very surprised. And he will be a serious contender for Brownlow level awards this year. He is a great player, equivalent to the greats of the past. And GWS effectively didn't have him last year. The difference in the skill is brought out in the wet. The skilled players are able to pick up the ball. They're able to kick the ball. They're able to deliver the ball. They're able to mark the ball. That's what shows out between the good teams and the not so good teams. It's purely about the capability. You cannot create skill. The coaches can do things around game plan and giving people roles, but you cannot turn, as they say in the classic, a sow's ear into a silk purse. If you want a Finn Callahan, you've got to get them in the draft. They don't come from pick 52 or pick 96. They are at the top end of the draft, and our best players, you've only got to look at our best players, our most highly skilled players. They're the ones who were all selected at the top of the draft. And it shows when you're kicking for goal. It simply shows up, and that's what killed us primarily in this game. Set shots, even in the first quarter, easy set shots from dead straight in front didn't make it. We've been talking about Max's kicking ability from set shots, and it hasn't changed over the years. Sometimes it gets through, sometimes it doesn't, but the actual skill levels haven't improved in terms of the set shots kicking, because you can't teach people, I believe, to kick better. I could quote probably 2 players in the whole of my years watching AFL who've actually improved their abilities with that. You either got it or you haven't, and unfortunately we've still got a lot of players who haven't got it, and GWS have got lots of players who have. So what gives me a great deal of hope is that an expectation for this season is they absolutely walloped Collingwood the previous week, and we got within 3 points of the same team. They are a seriously good side, and we're at least up and competitive with him at the very least, and probably pushing them.
Well, one sec, big man. So, George, do you think, had it been a dry day, and obviously it's a moot point because it wasn't, do you think the margin might have been larger? Do you think they would have absolutely their skill levels shine?
GWS on a clean day are frightening. Their ball movement. I think you'll see it more and more. They talk about the orange tsunami that comes in. It's not just their running ability, but they don't miss targets as a general rule. And on the dry day, they hit targets extraordinarily well. So while they may not have been able to execute as much as what they did, I think we just equally let ourselves down with that differential in front of goal. You've got to be able to kick the set shots when the opportunities are there. We had the opportunities, we didn't take them.
I agree. Just before I go to some of your points, George, I disagree. Andy, my answer to that question is no. I think we would have been as competitive in the dry as we were in the wet, because, as George notes, and I think that's the biggest myth in football, that there is no bigger myth that wet weather brings sides together. It's rubbish, because in fact it exacerbates poor technique. And as George said, you can't magic up skill. By the time they get to AFL level, they've got the skill they've got. They can maybe make some incremental improvements. They can get fitter. They can be less fatigued, because fatigue will, the longer they can be not fatigued for, then the better their skills will stand up. But it's been an issue for us for a decade, our kicking skills, and there's no way of magicking it up once they get to AFL level. And just speaking, if you legitimately think the Giants are a top 4 chance and flag chance, which I do, they're stacked with high-end draft picks, super talented team who, I don't know what the numbers are, but a big percentage of their team who ran out on the weekend would have been, first or second rounders. And so I think that, we were really hurt. Injuries, they had Ricardo, is it Ricardo? Riccardi out, Hogan out, Briggs out. So they're all big outs for us. But our outs hurt us more, I think, because our kicking skills are a challenge, and two of our top 5, in my opinion, kicks were out of the side in McVee and Cos. Both those two players play. It makes a huge difference, and it's not just kicking; it's sort of ball handling and skills. As you look at the way Finn Callahan picked that ball up in the middle of the ground and won that 50-50 against Henderson. I mean, that no knock on Henderson. That was a brilliant bit of play, and you compare that to no knock on Howes again, but Howes is picked 36 or something in the draft, and he fumbled that ball that coughed up that first goal that was a turnover that Green got, and it was just a fumble skill error. The better teams will have better players who make less skill errors. It's a simple fact. So we got it. It's the same for all teams, but we need our best players playing, and in particular the players with the high-end kicking skills and ball handling skills, because unfortunately our best players, Track and Oliver and Max, are all not very good kicks.
And Viney.
And Viney, who didn't have a great game. So I think there's no magic way to solve the skill issue. We've got what we've got.
All right, let's talk about our debutants. Jane02 writes, not a question, but more of an observation. For the first time in a long time, I don't actually feel that disheartened by this loss. I think our future looks bright with these young players who did not seem to be at all fazed by their big day. GWS are a seriously good side, so I think we can hold our heads high, and whilst a win would have been welcomed, I think we have a lot to look forward to. Track Forever writes, hi guys, great to have you back doing post-game reviews. With the 6 debutants, most fans would have predicted the loss would have been much bigger. As much as this loss hurts, I think the club should continue with this new group, as I love watching the new kids. My question is, did you all expect these debutants to have such a big impact? Lindsay, who I thought would have been an emergency, impressed me as much as Windsor did when he first played. And Mandalorian writes, super flat by the results, but happy with the effort in terrible conditions. 5 first gamers is the most of any team in the AFL era, not counting the inaugural matches of new teams. How did you rate each of the debutants in games, including Harry Sharp? And Lazy says, you can look at these games 2 ways: a missed opportunity to bank 4 points against a contender early in the season, or a day full of encouraging signs and something that can be built on. Monocular says, looking forward to the podcast as always. It is always bittersweet after the one that got away, but overall the drive and enthusiasm across the field was a real positive. I felt that all the newbies put in and none seemed overwhelmed. It was actually a very ballsy selection with a view to the near future rather than the more familiar recycling. And Tolstoy's Nudge says, as as crushing as it was to lose this one, knowing the magnitude this win would have garnered at the club, I think it's hard not to feel extremely buoyant about what we witnessed yesterday, even from perennial negs like Andy and George. Whilst B-Man, I suspect, enjoyed the fact that we looked fit, as well as there being a little in the bad/ugly front for his analysis this week. Well, to the 30 minutes he took says otherwise. Lots of learnings, including the modern game, where we need to know that the only way GWS win that game was to give them the ball back. So someone needed to tell AJ to kick to the pocket if there wasn't an open mark to hit up after taking his 30 seconds, so that we could go to work to ice the game. There was plenty of luck involved in the transition for GWS, but we gave them the opportunity to take it coast to coast, and that must be a key takeout for mine. The other being how well Jefferson competed, despite a member of this pod stating he couldn't possibly play due to being non-competitive. I think that's you, George. Of all the exciting signs yet, I want to know which took your fancy most, gents. Windsor looking like Tulip more and more. He's just in his second season. Lindsay looking unlike any Demon I can ever recall on debut in terms of his makeup, toughness, composure, and silky skills. If you can find a comparison, great, because I can't think of anyone he reminds me of apart from maybe a hybrid of a few different ones. And we've got 2 voicemails. I'm going to play a voicemail from Salty and then from Roadstar, and then we're going to go one by one through all the debutants. Here's Salty.
Yeah, boys. Salty here. Long time no speak. Wasn't that one a game for the Melbourne Demons SS just to flare right back up like a boil on your backside? It was you could just feel it coming all day that we'd toil and kick a goal, or scrappy goals often, and then they just seemingly at some point they just cut right through and slot a really nice one. It just felt like we just left the door open and they walked through it. Just wanted to comment on the 6 debutants. I thought they were all pretty good. Langford looked a little slow when he came on. I wonder whether we should have had him in the game earlier. He just looked a little bit behind it. I don't know if he added a lot, but first game. No, that's what it is. Wasn't that happy with Blake Howes. Thought he was pretty bad out there, and happy he was a sub. I'm wondering whether he's actually going to make it. I really wanted to see both him and Adams come on this year, and hopefully they do. That's all I got for you, but good to hear your voices again. And look, I think as Demons fans, we can look at that game and see we really did have a crack. We really tried. We seemed a lot more united. And GWS will be a top 4 side, so nothing much to stress about. And I know Bin Man will be banging on about the stats and the expected scores, and the expected scores said we should have won. So I think we all felt like that too. All right, enjoy. Bye.
And that he did. Here's Roadstar.
Hey guys, Roadstar here. Welcome back, season 2025. Hopefully a successful one for us. And just thought we'd touch base about the first game. And I think as tough as that was to swallow, as heart-wrenching as that was, and it just, I don't know, all day, just seemed like they were going to get us, and I don't know why. Maybe that was the MFCSS speaking there, Andy, but just always kind of felt like we were, we just needed to get one more goal, and in the end we did. But I think the youngsters showed a lot of promise, and we walk away with our heads held high. I think I don't want to go into trying to accept mediocrity here, but I think realistically, GWS, most pundits have got, pretty high up there on the ladder. And so to get so close and really to hold them, to the way they blew apart Collingwood the week before, which was amazing to see. It was good to see there wasn't too much of that. Probably the only query I had, maybe one for Bin Man, is we did seem to drop away at the end, especially the second quarter and the last quarter. I think the last 5 minutes just really seemed to struggle to compose ourselves and hold the ball, whether that was just circumstance or whether that's something deeper. But anyway, boys, as always, look forward to the potty and, look forward to spending another year with you. So we'll chat to you again soon. Thanks, guys.
Good to hear from both those guys. All right, let's go through the debutants one by one, and we'll start with the one that impressed me the most, and that was the D's second selection in the draft and number 11 overall, Xavier Lindsay, who had 22 disposals, 6 tackles, 4 inside 50s, 2 score involvements, and 82% disposal efficiency, and he had 100% disposal efficiency in the wet from 14 disposals at halftime. So that's super impressive and a super impressive debut, Bin Man. Anything to say about Xavier Lindsay?
He's fantastic. Exactly the sort of player, as I said when we drafted him, that we need, and a really good example of you don't get that sort of skill with a player who's picked 40 usually. Like he's picked 11 in the draft. Super high level skill, and I suspect there's only a handful of players in the team at the moment with a green light to take on risky kicks, and he's already one of them. So Cos would be another one, McVie would be one, perhaps Zalo, Bowie, and Melksham would be the other one, and Lindsay can join that group. really high footy IQ. He did a couple of things right in front of me, which were just so clever. Like he didn't take possession at one time, at one point when he just would have got smashed. Instead, sort of got it forward. He handballs into space. I think I noted that when from the vision I saw pre-draft. He handballs into space so players can run onto it, and he's got the skill that just so few players at Melbourne seem to have, that sort of kick on the diagonal, that sort of 45-degree kick, and he comes back through the corridor. Love him. I think he's going to be a gun, and he's also got sort of leadership stamped all over him. He seems a real leader. Tough too for a relatively skinny looking bloke. He looks like Windsor. Really surprised me how tough he was last year. I expected that from Lindsay because I'd seen it on his vision. But yeah, a fantastic debut.
Next we go to Matthew Jefferson. Jeffo exploded onto the scene in the first 15 seconds, roving off the pack and booting through a goal with his first kick in AFL footy, joining that elusive club for first kick, first goal. He ended with two majors, providing a great lead to mark for our only goal in the last quarter, and incidentally our only goal from a set shot. He had only the 5 disposals, 2 tackles and 1 mark. So I get the impression that Matt got the call up late in the piece. It was reported through our track watchers and I think confirmed by the MSC that Disco Turner was withdrawn from availability due to a stomach bug. So he's obviously moved up in the pecking order. So George, you've probably seen a lot more of the development of Jefferson at Casey. How did you see his game? And do you think he's likely to keep that spot this week with Disco more than likely to be available?
It's going to be a difficult question. A lot of people are very happy with his return out of this game. But as you mentioned, it was in the first 15 seconds and then the last quarter. His goals, and also if it wasn't for Caleb Windsor's absolutely magnificent breakthrough series of tackles and the delivery was just perfect. Even Bin Man or I could have marked that ball, so to speak.
Are you saying I wouldn't have marked it?
Oh, you could too, yeah. Well,
and he would have had more chance of marking it than me, I can assure you.
But what really concerns me about Jeffo is exactly what we've been seen at Casey and have spoken about before, is the second efforts. For the majority of the time he was on the ground, Himmelberg was his opponent. Himmelberg got 22 possessions and absolutely was let run up the ground time and time again. And Jeffo was plodding along behind. Don't just look at what he does when he kicks the ball, through the big sticks. You've got to look at the work that he does behind the play, and he's still very, very much lacking in those areas. So will he stay in the side? I don't know. It's pretty hard to drop a first gamer after he's kicked a couple of goals and shown something, and you want to build their confidence. But at the moment, I think Turner provides much more aggression, much more opportunity in the forward line than Jeffo has to date. So, yeah, it's going to be a difficult choice for the selectors this week.
I thought his pressure was actually not too bad. So his pressure numbers surprised me a little bit, to be honest, in terms of how much pressure. He was better in the one-on-one marking contest. Where he's got to work on his instinct is when the ball hits the deck, like that second effort, like that instinct to go. I actually think it's the perfect first game for him, because I think Turner will come in for him, but he can go back, work on those things. He's got a couple of goals now under his belt. To be honest, and we'll talk about this a bit later, but I think he ends up competing with Fritter for a position. Fritter better get on his bike, and he's got a lot of credit in the bank, but he's spending it pretty quick in my book, Fritter. And I just feel like they'll end up competing for the same spot, and Jeffo will go past him if he's not careful, Fritter.
Yeah, you agree with that?
Yeah, we've got more on Fritter a bit later. So, yep. All right, let's get on to the next one. At 25, Jack Henderson was given an opportunity to join an AFL list in the pre-season supplemental selection period as a result of his high work rate and impressive VFL career at Werribee. 25 days after joining the D's list, he was given the call up to play in round one. As a small forward, he impacted the scoreboard with a sneaky goal, had 13 disposals, 4 score involvements, 3 tackles, 2 clearances and 1 inside 50. Big man, what are your thoughts on Henderson? Where does he sit in the pecking order of small forwards, with Cozzy still out for another 2 matches, Spargo possibly nearing a return? Where do you see Henderson sort of fitting in?
I was super impressed, I have to say. Speaking of player ratings, his player rating was 10.1. There wouldn't be too many players whose debut game was 10.1. Well, in this game, I think Lindsay was more, but not much more. I've talked about this for a couple of years. It's our biggest weakness is our small defenders' ability to match up on the Toby Greens and the sort of Daniels and what's the guy with the helmet that played for them?
Jones.
I thought we actually did pretty well in that regard. Bowser had his best game, and we have the same problem at the other end. If you look at all the best teams now, and the Giants and I reckon the Lions are the two best at the moment, but even the Swans, they've got that fleet of small to medium forwards that we just don't have. And if you take Cos out and he spends more minutes time, players like Henderson becomes critical. I think he'll certainly stay in the side on that performance. He's exactly what we need. Speaking of kicking skills, he missed Sharp with that. If he hit Sharp with that bit of play where Sharp led up the middle, he turned that. It was right below me. He turned those players inside out. It was a real clever bit of play. Gutsy went hard at it. So yeah, I thought it was a fantastic debut. And at the moment, Spargo, him. I think Spargo will press back in. We need 2 or 3 of those players in the team at any one time in modern footy, I reckon. And he's in the side at the moment until I think he's got a spot, for the foreseeable future. What did you think, George?
Yeah, very, very impressed. And I think we were talking about Fritter before. The lack of pressure in Cossie's absence in the forward line was really critical in this game. They waltzed the ball out from one end to the other numerous times. We needed that pressure, and there just simply wasn't anything. But Henderson is the type of player that we need in there to do that, and because he's 24 years of age and plays tough, hard footy. You get that added bonus around the goals when the ball does hit the ground. He's exactly the sort of player we need.
And good at ground level. And wasn't it awesome, just as a sort of related point, that all four of our debuts scored a goal? How often would have that happened in AFL history?
I was hoping for the six-pack. It would have been nice.
Six-pack with Langford kicking goal after the siren. That would have been
that would have been nice. So Aidan Johnson, I'll play first the voicemail that we've got from Flower Magic.
Yeah, hi, it's Flower Magic here. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm interested to hear your opinion on the Aidan Johnson ruck experiment. I thought in the last quarter that he got beaten badly in most of the contests he went to, and I thought that was critical in the overall result. I thought Max was off the ground for too long in that last quarter, or at least they might have considered putting Van Rooyen into the ruck to stop the bleeding. I'm just interested to hear what you boys think about that, and whether the Johnson experiment is going to work for the rest of the year. Thanks. Keep up the good work.
So Henderson's Werribee teammate Aidan Johnson, who was the D's third pick in the draft and pick 68 overall, he also made his debut. He was crashing packs. My notes say he might get rubbed out, but he has been rubbed out for one game for that rough contact incident. 7 disposals, 1 mark, 5 tackles and 5 hit-outs and a goal. He had his chance to ice the game with a shot on goal in the last quarter, but missed. His inclusion in the team does save JVR from having to do some of that punishing relief ruck work, but maybe, George, what do you think? Should as Flower Magic alluded to, what did you think of his last quarter, and do you think we should have maybe put JVR in, as much as we've been screaming for us not to play him in the ruck?
I think the simplest solution would have been to put Max in the ruck in the last quarter.
Yeah, he was off for a long time.
It was off for an awful long time.
He was.
There was another, just on a totally unrelated matter, with 53 seconds to go, we put Petrarca in the forward line, not in the middle. That was not the right thing to do. You've got to get the ball in your hands and get it forward, rather than, as we did, we put Langdon in the middle. It was just incomprehensible to me.
There was talk that track called an audible, so to speak, and there was a set play almost come off. If it had bounced properly for Langdon, the next ball goes to track. So
Yeah, but you put your best players in at that time, not a player who didn't play a single second in the midfield for the whole game at the last play in the game. Totally unrelated. All right, AJ. Yes, I hope we appeal against the decision, given the other decisions that other clubs tonight have already indicated they're going to appeal. I think AJ's was the least of the ones that should have received a penalty in any case. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. I thought he did a great job. It's his first game at AFL level, although he's got a mature body. What I really like was the aggression he brought to the game. I don't know the actual numbers, but there are a number of goals that we got that was simply because he was hitting packs. He was scrapping in the goal square where others weren't, but he was putting in absolutely everything, and that's all you can expect from a player. It was unfortunate. I'm not critical at all about his kick for goal in the last quarter. What we should have done was kick the previous set shot goals, and that was to that punt road end. As Binman said, I was more down that end. The wind was very gusty around it. And I was, as he was coming in, I was saying, just hold off, wait for the wind to drop, because it was up and then it was down, and it was up and then it was down. I wouldn't blame AJ for any of that. I was more concerned about the way that GWS was able to transition the ball out without basically anybody getting near it from that point kick in to go up the other end. But AJ was great. He's only 194, I think. He's not a tall person, but he's a big, strong person, which we do need in the ruck, and I much prefer to use him instead of Van Rooyen. I think we'll see more of him over the season.
I reckon it's fascinating because for me, it's a little bit easy to get, overemphasize how competitive he is as a strength. And in that third quarter, he was fantastic. Just looking at his player ratings, he was negative for all quarters, but that third quarter where he was 8.6 player ratings, and he was fantastic. That goal he kicked out of the ruck, out of that marking scramble was fantastic, and his effort is brilliant. And Goody loves those sort of players. Facts are facts in terms of the last quarter. It was a bit strange how long Maxi was off, and we got smashed for stoppages in that last quarter. Even Goody said it was a big factor in them winning because they dominated territory from it. That's not really AJ's fault, but he's got a lot of work to get on his rucking. I wouldn't say he's any better than JVR as a ruck, but it means that JVR isn't rucking. As I said, ironically, JVR was pretty quiet, so it didn't really pay off. It was not a great day for forwards, I guess, and he did have the best. One thing that these fans are unbelievable at forgetting is we lost May on the. There's barely any discussion on Demonland. We haven't raised it yet. We lost. He's arguably the best key defender in the AFL, Steve May, and fortunately, we had someone who I thought had a brilliant game, as I said, who could cover him. But
that's why you're not hearing.
Well, partly, but then that's my point about injuries are different, depending on. But if you take Taylor out of that side, Taylor was on JVR and killed him. Taylor gave JVR a lesson, but Taylor, I think, if it's not Steve May, it's Taylor is the best defender in the AFL. He is a genuine star.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree.
Smart, he's unbelievably strong in the air considering his size. He was a major difference in that game. You take him out of that side, it's hard to see us losing that match, and that's just really my point about the sort of impact of injuries. But AJ's effort was fantastic. I just, as a side, I'm not sure if there's a question about it. How long was to go when he was lining up for that shot? Was it still a couple of minutes?
Who, Johnson? I think it was still 5 minutes even.
Because that wasn't that long. Because it was going to be much more than 90 seconds, or because they went straight up the other end and scored a goal, and then
was that from that?
About 40 seconds left.
53 seconds after that one.
I just had 2 minutes to go.
Well, I was screaming for him I wanted him to kick to the side or to give it off and to burn another 30 seconds because I didn't think he had it. that in him, partly because of what George said. Maxi kicked from 10 metres back from almost the same spot. Didn't look like making the distance, or did, but it sort of swirled around. So, yeah, I don't know that tactically we did great in that last couple of minutes. And and I agree with, was it Rostar? I think we did run out a bit of puff in that last part of the game, which is not which is almost what every team playing the first game of the season did in other games, where the teams who have played that first match clearly seem to. We've got enough data so far from the opening round that they've got an advantage.
The D's first pick in the draft and pick 6 overall has been the most impressive of the draftees over the preseason, with many earmarking him for a round 1 debut from the first time that big-bodied midfielder hit the training track. And then we're, of course, talking about Harvey Langford. Many on Demonland were surprised to hear that he was a sub and were disappointed that a debutant was used in this way. And reading the comments in the post-game thread on Demonland, there are a lot of people that were underwhelmed by his performance and thought that he seemed underdone and gassed by the end of the only quarter that he played. And I think that assessment might be a little bit unfair, given it's a difficult task to come on late as a sub, as I think maybe Salty had mentioned. And then to come on and have an immediate impact. It does and has happened where someone comes on as sub, has an immediate impact. But from only 21% game time, the least of both teams, Harvey's had 5 possessions and 1 inside 50. It's difficult to judge this one in isolation, big man.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I totally understand Pearl's point about the risk of putting too much weight on stats. But one of the things I do, and data, and one of the things I do like about it is to counteract sort of, I guess, confirmation bias and what the eyes tell you. I felt was a bit disappointed in how he played in the last quarter. So imagine my surprise when I saw his numbers, 3.6 player points in that last quarter. If you did that over 4 quarters, that's a 13, 14 point game, which is a pretty impressive game of footy. And then, so I looked at some of his work that he did. And he worked, he does a lot of things off the ball. And a couple of things were really classy, but I was a bit disappointed too. I was really flummoxed by the decision to put him on the bench. I don't have any problem, to be honest, with a person debuting being on the bench, particularly when you've got so many others. Statistically, there's a pretty good chance one of them is going to be on the bench. Just seems to he's not the sort of player I would have thought that is a natural bench player, because he's not dynamic he's not quick enough for that sort of come on in fresh legs. I would have. And once he was made sub, to be honest, I would have taken either Jefferson off or Fritter off 10 minutes in, 15 minutes into the third quarter, and particularly after it started hammering down with rain, and bringing Langford on. So, it was a hard game for him to come on and impact straight away, given the conditions, and maybe he would have been nervous. I have to look at it again, probably because I haven't watched that last quarter. I've only watched some of the highlights of it. And I did look for a bit of his play, but I want to watch it again to see really how he went.
I think the unfortunate thing with Langford is he's basically a pure mid. Yeah. And when you've got Petrarca, Oliver and Viney all on the field, where do you actually put him? Short of putting him in right from the start of the game as a rotation from the start. I don't think he was a good sub. I think he would have been quite okay on the bench, but I don't think he was the right sort of sub, particularly when you sub out Howes, who's playing in the back line, and replace him. It just wasn't right. You could have, for example, put a Sharp on as a sub who would have provided
given run when you need run. And I do wonder whether he isn't that quick. He's not that seems to be there. So maybe they've got the relative leg speed advantage. Maybe that was part of the mix. But I thought it was really weird bringing Howes off too. I know Howes didn't have a great game, but I think one of the reasons they brought Howes because Rivers wasn't doing much, and they brought Rivers back. And you muck around with the defence there's a downside to that, and I think that showed in the last quarter. Speaking of which, the defence, that's why I think about it. We were terrible defending what's his name? Coniglio. It lost us the game. 3 goals. I was furious at the ground. It's 2 of them, no one was on him.
There's
And
talk
another
about
one
that.
was no one's on the goal line. It was just terrible defense. I thought that was so bringing Howes off as he wasn't playing great, but I thought it was a big risk disrupting our defensive half at that point. But our defending Green got 3 goals. He's a medium. Cornelio got 3 goals. That's 6. And Ware, is it? The guy who could kick the first goal. 7 of their, how many goals they kicked? 9?
11.
7 of their 11 goals were from small mediums. And whereas
we got a question about that, so let's
talk about
it. We'll
I did
continue
read
on
the
with-
run sheet, Andy.
You did that. That's fine. I'm just because we no use rehashing it later. So, Harry Sharp, whilst not being an AFL debut, this was the first game Harry's played for the Demons. Harry was one of 4, as we mentioned, Demon debutants to hit the scoreboard. He had 9 possessions, 4 score involvements, laid 2 tackles. George, thoughts on Harry's game?
Yeah, honestly didn't notice him a lot in the game, and 9 total possessions over 4 quarters is not surprising. I think what he brought to us was the enthusiasm. He was obviously keen to make a mark in the side to sort of cement his place for the future. I think what more importantly, he'll provide us with options. As I've just said, also I think it would have been a better sub, bring on the bit of the leg speed when you need the leg speed in the last quarter. It was difficult. I didn't quite see where he was being used in the sense, was he rotated with Windsor? Was he rotated
Sort of high
with
half
Lindsay?
forward,
Yeah,
the nibbler role essentially.
Yeah, it was a bit of this, a bit of that, though, wasn't it? Look, it was his first game. Didn't expect too much. You can't expect too much. And I think over the season he will get plenty of games, because in that sort of area there will be injuries. There will be players who are not quite up to it already, so I think he'll provide us with the options that we have missed seriously in the last 2 years.
It would have been good if he got that goal. I think a big factor in the loss was we just didn't put enough goal pressure on when we had the momentum. They kept on getting those goals, including both Caniglio's goals were when we had the momentum. And if he'd kicked that goal, it would have iced a really good period of play. We just needed to stretch that lead out to 12, 15 points. We deserved it. And you just got to kick those goals when you get straight in front. There wasn't much excuse to miss that one.
And whilst Caleb Windsor wasn't a debutant, he does have a new role in 2025, playing off the halfback flank. The most impressive piece of play he was involved in was that stunning run off halfback at the start of the third quarter when he received a handball and deftly navigated traffic, entering the 50-metre arc and booting through a fantastic goal on the run. Love to see more of that. Bimman, your thoughts on Caleb's new role and how he executed it in this match?
How exciting was, like, he had a dry run going for it with that shank kick that he did that ended up setting up a goal, didn't it? The one that Henderson got, I think, where Jefferson did that funky bit of play, putting it back in. But that goal was, that was a set play. I haven't watched that yet on replay, but I said to my mate at the game, that was pure set play. If you watch that, that would have been in Goody's dreams, that one, the way that's set up, because he came from inside the 50-metre line at the setup. It came from the bounce. Petrarca, I think, got it to him. Maxi won.
I think it was Petrarca to Viney to Windsor.
And it gave me a good chance to sledge his opponent, because his opponent, and I forget who it was miles behind him, spanning, 40 metres away. It was, it was just a phenomenal bit of play. I will say, however, just on the sort of negative side, that he's got great footy IQ, but he's still got a bit of work to do defensively. A couple of times he sort of got himself sort of stuck in that middle zone. And, I know it's not his go to come across and impact contest in terms of third man up and that sort of intercept stuff. But just defensively, a couple of times he looked in no man's land a little bit. Maybe I'm being a bit unfair.
In fairness to him, he's probably never played in defence.
Yeah, exactly.
Before.
No, he hasn't. It's only his first AFL game of footy at halfback flank. So no knock on him in that sense. It's just more the point of, I'm really fascinated by our defensive setup this year. We're changing it from what has historically, for the last 5 years has been the best defense in the AFL by country mile. And we're bringing new players in and sort of some change, not radical changes. I think that's overstated, but, he's one of the new pieces to that puzzle. So, I'm not saying that he won't work in that role, just he's got a bit of work to do defensively. And that run from half-back flank is going to be so critical for us transitioning the ball and being a team that can move the ball from our defensive half to our forward half.
When I just on Eddie's part, I think just as equally and perhaps even more importantly in terms of play was the goal that he gave to Jefferson, where that reminded me absolutely of a Robert Flower type thing. He took the ball, he knew exactly where he was going. He should not have been able to get through two Giants players. He was strong. He went straight through the middle, sidestepped them beautifully, and then beautifully kicked it straight onto his chest. It was, just an example of the skills that we do need and have needed, and able to deliver under pressure. That was really something more so than the fans and everybody and loves watching him run up the middle of the ground, but actually in high pressure games. When you hit someone like that in the last quarter when you're looking for goals, that was great.
Well, and as impressive was breaking 2 tackles on the way to that. And also fair play to Jeffo, that was a perfectly timed lead, something that JVR seemed to get himself muddled up a little bit yesterday, I thought. But that was a magnificent bit of play. Kid's a jet, isn't he? He's a total jet.
Bigfoot says, why can't we win these close games against GWS? In our last 3 games against the Giants, we've lost by 3 points, 2 points and 2 points. In fact, we can't hold on in these close matches. It's infuriating. And what adds our last 3 games versus GWS and the Blue Baggers have seen us lose all 3 by a total of 7 points. Why do we match up so well with both of these sides, and why can't we beat either of them? So, big man, I think I read somewhere that we've lost about 6 or 7 out of our last 7 or 8 close games. I don't remember what the one we won was. Why do we know how to win these type of games? Why can't we ice them or hold on?
On the flip side, I think teams go through swings and roundabouts a bit with this, because prior to that, I think we'd won 5 of 6 games from under goal being the margin or whatever. It's so frustrating, isn't it? Again, I just had this flashback to losing to them last year in Brisbane and Carlton, and why I think you could dissect that last bit. I think we're a little bit on the back foot. Clary, he looked gassed, and why did they do it? They won that ball in the middle. They were a bit lucky. One of those kicks was a bit scrubby. They had a bit of luck. I think Maxi got run off. Keith ran off him. Maybe Maisie being back, that's when, you lose a player of the quality of Steve May. It's hard not to think that May would have been able to position himself to track that ball as it came down the ground and make sure that he gave, no one the opportunity. But you've got to give credit where it's due. That was a brilliant bit of footy. And the big play was Finn Callahan in the middle, And again, that's where we chose to bring in a number of debutants. And as much as you're right, Henderson is he's 24, 25, played plenty of games against men. In his first game, he got beaten in a 50-50 ball by a player who, as George said, probably got 6 Brownlow votes under his belt, so it was a great play by them. I really thought there was a critical moment, and it was really unfair. It was unlucky. His lever's been knocked for it, but that kick, was it to Salem that didn't go 15 metres, or Viney?
That was ridiculous.
I thought, given, yes, they've been cracking down on in this, they cracked down on in this round, but in that match, there were a dozen kicks that were shorter than that were called play on. I thought it was a completely reasonable option, because that's what we needed to do at that stage, hold on to the ball. And if we'd been able to sort of take 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute out of the clock at that stage by chipping it around, we might have ended up winning that game. So, but also too, as I said, you take McVee. If we, out of our best 22, we had McVee out, Cos out, Steve May out, arguably Colt. I'm missing someone. Who's the other player? Well, that's at least 4 of our best 22. At least 3. You take quality players out of the side, you're going to struggle. So, and then you've got players like, as much as he's frustrating to watch, Toby Green takes his chances. That was a beautiful kick by Keith. So, credit to him.
Flushed it. Let's talk about tagging. Damo says we need to have a stopper like the role Toby Bedford plays. If so, who? I think Sharp is the only one fast enough to stay with the guns, but maybe he's not big enough. I watched Track outmuscle Toby, and BW511 adds, if we had someone to negate Finn Callahan in the last quarter, or all quarters, I think the result plays out differently. His size and running power will overwhelm a lot of teams this year. It's not always pretty, but he definitely sparks action. So, George, we've discussed tagging a lot in the past few seasons. We know this isn't Goody's style. Can you see him employing this tactic, and who on the current list could undertake this role?
I don't think there's too many coaches around employ tagging these days. It's something that's disappeared from the game for very good reason. It's better to match player for player. You put your good players in and let them battle it out. And if we had Finn Callahan in our side, we would have probably won this game as well, because he is a absolutely brilliant player.
He was impressive. Wasn't he? He was impressive.
And you know, as coaches have found out over the years, you can try and tag Finn Callahan, and he'll probably still get 25 possessions and kill you. And then, unfortunately, you'll also let Toby Green off the hook because you're tagging Finn Callahan. It just doesn't work like it used to. So, it's not something that we can employ, and it's just not worthwhile. You know, the suggestion to put Sharp in against Toby Green, I know what would happen pretty quickly. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. And Goody makes it all the time. And I heard Buckley talk about this. Of course you can tag, of course you can run a player, but then there's always an unintended consequences. And for us, I thought our defensive structure and system was really excellent. I mean, as I said, we only gave up 29 points from our defensive half, which, by the by, people sometimes can think defensive half means our defence. Defensive half is from the centre line everywhere back to the opposition's goal. So it's a bit of a misnomer. But we only gave up 29 points, where the Pies gave up 60-odd points against the Giants. So there actually wasn't much of the orange tsunami, and a big part of that was our defensive system and structure. To tag Finn Callahan, we have to take someone out of that structure and put him on Finn Callahan, and maybe then we give up 45 points on from the defensive half. So, I think they'll always put time into players who are really critical to Pies set up so much of their game plan around Dacos that it makes sense to take him out of the game physically and mentally, I reckon.
And he doesn't play in the middle, so he's more an outside play. If you stop his run and carry and delivery,
exactly,
then you achieve something. But
go. He's critical to their game plan, whereas Finn Callahan's just an excellent footballer. He's not so much critical to their. But as Goody, maybe it was one of the other coaches said to this very question, would you say, well, you've got to have the player who can do it. And I personally think that Wowie may be that sort of player, and it might be his only way back into the best 22. But, you've got to have a player who's got the discipline to run with a player and still get numbers themselves and still hurt the other way. You can't in modern footy have someone tagging and only have 6 and 7 kicks, and, that's all they do is negate.
Singer writes, as I entered the ground, I was hit with the daunting news that Stephen May was a late withdrawal, and normally losing one of our premier key defenders just before the first bounce would send a wave of panic through me, but instead of dread, I felt a quiet sense of reassurance knowing that Tommy McDonald, our very own Rock of Gibraltar, was stepping in to fill the void. And didn't he stand up? He was immense, reading the play well and holding his own against the Giants. Then there was the ever-reliable Jakey Lever, our defensive general, once again showcasing his ability to intercept, direct traffic and take charge in the air. His leadership and composure were critical as always. And, of course, the sight of Harry Petty back in his natural defensive role was a welcome relief. He took strong marks, made his presence felt and showed why his best footy is played in the back half. So our big men down back, they're not the issue. Neither are our distributors coming out of defence. Our ball movement from half-back from the likes of Windsor, Salem and Bowie was generally solid. The glaring problem, however, is when the ball hits the deck. We struggle to contain the nimble, elusive small forwards who thrive on ground balls and chaos inside 50. Time and time again, we seem to step behind in locking down those opportunistic opportunistic goal sneaks. If we don't address this weakness, it will be our Achilles heel all season. Whether it's a personnel issue, a structural flaw, or a lack of defensive cohesion at ground level, it's something we need to fix and to fix fast. Your thoughts? D. Rev says, Coniglio and Green kick 3 goals each. Who is best placed to shut down these small forwards that get away from us so often? We seem to have no shortage of tall or mid-sized defenders. I would think that we should have someone who can't make it as a midfielder who has the desire to play AFL in any role. This as well is a topic we've poured over in the last few years, guys. Nev Jetta used to be the man. Hibberd played that role too. Judd McVie has taken on this role, but he's out for a few more weeks. Andy Menzies-Wakefield, he was earmarked for this type of role, but as we know, he missed the entire season now with an ACL injury. It's a big man. We're great at intercepting the ball in the air in defence, but when the ball hits the deck and not winning the ground ball in the forward 50 arc is a problem. Your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, I totally 100% agree with both Singer and E-Rev's comments, as I was talking about before. 7 of their 11 goals came from those sort of players. One of the Green's goal, to be fair, was when he was playing as a midfield. And the question as to whether it's a personnel issue or structural flaw or lack of defensive, for me, it's purely 100% a personnel issue. We just don't have that sort of player. And as whether a midfielder can go back, I think it downplays how difficult it is it is a really tough gig down there defending the players of the skill of, Stengel and Cameron and Green. And, like Green is what he can outmark big fellas and also play on the ground. It's like, for me, Quaynor is the best player in the AFL at that, and we need a similar player. McVie is the star, but I'd like to see McVie freed up, not have to play on the Camerons. AMW going down was huge, I think. Seston's playing back at the halfback flank, but I see him is not really, he's more of an attacking halfback flanker with his kicking skills. Wowie, I think, might be the sort of player. Again, it's a tricky, I think it's a personnel issue. I thought Bowie had his best game in a long time. That was a great performance by Bowie. He's obviously part of the answer. Laurie, if he is going to make it, time's running out for him. I take George's point about there's a lot of people in front of him now. Laurie is he was drafted in the same year as Bowie, wasn't he, Laurie? So he, but again, it's no easy task to learn how to, you can't just throw someone back and hope that they're any good as a defender. I was hoping we'd get someone in specifically for it through trading in. So I think it will remain a big issue. We cover it relatively well with our structure and system. I don't know who else that we could run through there. There's definitely a spot there for the taking should someone need to step up. But it's 100% a huge. I think our biggest weakness and the sort of mirror of that is that we don't have enough small forwards who play that role. If you look at Brisbane, they're stacked full of those small and medium players, and I don't see how we fill it. To be honest, so it's going to remain an issue for us until we can get a quality small defender.
Smurf writes, in the final quarter, we were completely overrun by the Giants' swift and efficient transition game out of their defence. Their last 2 goals were generated from deep within our forward 50, yet they managed to move the ball end-to-end with alarming ease, ultimately sealing the win. What was most concerning was the lack of pressure in our forward half. The Giants found space, linked up cleanly, and exited without much resistance, exposing our defensive structures. Adding to the concern, it seemed like we simply ran out of gas in the final stages, whether it was due to conditioning, the wet, soggy conditions, or the intensity of the contest catching up with us. We looked second best when it mattered most. Was it a structural breakdown, a fitness issue, or simply the Giants executing the game plan to perfection? Keen to hear your thoughts. So, George, what do you think of the Giants' ball movement out of defence in that last quarter and our inability to stop them?
I think it was a combination of both. The Giants were very good. They're very good at set-type plays, particularly coming out of the back line. They've got 2 brilliant backmen in Taylor and Himmelberg, who quite honestly carved our forwards to pieces. We had JVR probably playing one of his least impressive games in the forward line. I would give him some credits because people forget too easily he was subbed out of the previous game with back spasms in the first 30 seconds. for anybody who's had back injuries, you don't get over them really quick. You might be on the field, but it affects your ability to run and jump and move freely. And I think that was what was still going on with JVR in this game. Jeffo, I said, was caught out of position horribly on time and time again. And he certainly is not a run and chaser. Fritter had one of his worst games, and I think there's big questions, as Binman said, about his role in the side. He's only kicked 2 goals in the last 4 games. So the question is, what is he actually bringing to the side? Because he certainly didn't bring any attack at the ball in this game. So in a way, it wasn't surprising how quickly GWS were able to move the game. But with the loss of A and B, who are our defensive forwards, and what the idea these days is when you get it into the forward line, because it's so hard, you've got to lock it in there, but it bounced out so easily in this game. Wasn't very great to look at, but don't forget GWS are a damn good side, and they've got a lot of damn good players across the whole ground, including their backline. So we deserved in a way.
And I reckon that's a really good point, George. Not only are they a really good side, is they're a really settled side. And so, it's easy to laud having 6 new debutants, but why it's usually a massive pointer to losing. It's like there's some, Paul Roos used to talk about it, you bring in more than 4 players, you can almost never win a game of footy. Now it's a bit different round 1, but that many new players playing their, in new system, of course there's going to, they're not going to be a well-oiled machine like the way the Giants are. And on JVR, again, as I said before, like Taylor is a genuinely, he's a superstar of the game really at the moment, isn't he? So,
I think he is the best fullback in the league.
Yeah. He reads the ball so well.
He reads the ball so well. He's got everything going for him,
Yeah.
Lefty says, gutted by the results, but like others have mentioned, I was pleased with the effort. I didn't catch many other games this weekend, so I'm not sure if this is a common tactic now. But did you notice that we're consistently choosing to man the mark outside 5? What are your thoughts on this approach? And I must notice this too in both of our practice matches as well as in this match. B-Man, your thoughts on manning the mark outside 5, as they say? Is this something you noticed, and are other teams doing it?
Lefty must have, is it Lefty? So
Lefty, yes.
Must have been reading my mind, because I thought exactly the same thing during the game. And the answer to that, the question about did it happen in other games, is I think I watched most of the other games, all bar, maybe not all of them, but I watched sort of most of the games, if that makes sense. And yes, it's a very common tactic. And I think it makes sense because it's sort of now the de-rigueur of the way of playing is that sort of fast ball movement. Whereas, when we were playing them more down the line, it was territory. We wanted to stop them getting territory. It really is very common. It's almost becoming more common than manning the mark. But, when the ball's not inside the arcs, obviously. But in between the arcs, it seems like almost every time they're doing that. And it seemed to me a weird thing is a few times is that it didn't look 5 metres from where the mark was taken. It's like roughly wherever the player stopped, and they're jumping around, and it sort of makes sense because then they want to move the ball on, but you're not, it increases the arc in which you can protect the play, protect the angle that the players can kick, if that makes sense. They do it a lot in basketball where you sort of like you reduce the angles where that they can release the ball, as opposed to if you're just on the mark, as soon as they play on, they get around you, they've got options either way. So yes, I did notice it, and yes, it's in fact beyond. It seems like it's almost every mark between the arc these days. They're doing that 5 metre rule.
I can tell you, I saw most of the games. Every team is doing it now, and it's quite simple. As a Binman said, if you stand on the mark and the umpire calls stand, firstly, they don't insist that the player who's got the ball kicks in a straight line.
Yeah.
That player is already 2 metres away off to the side. You can't move if you're standing on the mark, and you can't move. And when other teams are using sort of players going past,
yep.
When you're 5 metres away, you can see that happening and you can react. you're allowed to react, but
you're allowed to move, and they're jumping around. And
that's right.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're not just cutting off the angles for the player kicking the ball. You're cutting angles off for the players coming past. So I can assure you, every single side is doing it, and with a bit of luck, the AFL will finally realise that stand is absolutely ridiculous, and they'll get that up on that as well.
But you're right. It does. I hadn't thought about that. It's exactly right. Like if you're standing and can't move, then anyone running past has got a free handball give, and so they're not doing that at all. Like not giving that handball, at all if they can, or stopping it, I should say.
Master, we've talked about this already, so we can skip past it, but Master Chief asks, is it worrisome that we only kicked one goal from a set shot, or do we just chalk it up to the conditions? And Delightful Play responded to that, saying that was one of the standouts for me in Wheelo's stats for the game, 11 set shots for 1 goal, 4 behind, 6 misses, compared to their 9 set shots for 5 goals, 3 behinds and 1 miss. Even 3 behinds rather than misses would have helped us at the end of the game, never mind failure to convert to goal. Demonize says set shot kicking. I know this is a well-worn tune, but when Sparrow missed that one in the first couple of minutes, pretty much straight in front, it was a taste of things to come. George, can we chalk this damning stat down to the conditions, or is it simply just not good enough? And I think we've talked about enough. So
no, it's simply not good enough. And there's a difference between set shot kicking and ordinary kicking in the field of play. Set shot kicking is something that you just follow a technique with all the time. All the great goal kickers all use very reliable, conditioned approaches to the way they do it. Hogan does it. He's a great kick for goal. They're all the same. Our players aren't. Some of the approaches. Max is probably the worst example of the whole lot about how not to take a set shot.
He's got about 4 different routines depending on where he's kicking it from.
And of all the kicking capabilities, I think set shot kicking is something you can improve.
Yeah, I agree.
And I'm starting to question what Mark Williams is doing as a kicking coach. That after all this time, and he's been around for quite a number of years now, we're not seeing any.
Worse.
Sorry,
I think we've gotten worse.
You need it to get better, and it certainly has not been the case with set shot kicking anyhow. So.
Okay, let's move on. Pew 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 writes, how good was the start to the third quarter? Within moments, we saw the kind of explosive direct football that makes us so dangerous when we're at our best. Twice in quick succession, we surged out of the centre with real intent, slicing through the Giants' midfield pressure and turning clearance wins into scoreboard impact almost instantly. First, there was the electric dash from Caleb Windsor off half-back. His speed and confidence to take the game on were outstanding. Watching a young player back himself and break lines like that was a real highlight. Then moments later, it was the midfield brute force of Christian Petrarca who argued his way out of the middle, demonstrating that powerful breakaway speed and fed the ball to a charging Tom Sparrow who made no mistake. 2 quick goals, pure burst football, and suddenly the momentum was all of ours. This is exactly the type of centre clearance dominance we need to see more often. When we win the ball at speed and surge forward with clean hands and aggressive running, we look almost unstoppable. The challenge, of course, is maintaining that level of intensity and execution consistently across 4 quarters. So what do we need to do to ensure this brand of football becomes the norm rather than just a glimpse? And Big Man, we were about 20 seconds away and another breakaway centre clearance away from replicating the bang from the 21 grand final. So, Big Man, can we expect
one more bang?
Can we expect that from every centre bounce? I sure would like to see that more often, and obviously you can't expect that every centre bounce, but yeah, we want to see more of that.
Well, I've watched the replay to halftime, and I will watch the rest of it. But let's not forget, the first 90 seconds of the game were just as exciting as that beginning of the third quarter, because we got the goal, must be one of the fastest goals Melbourne, being at the top 30 fastest goals the Melbourne Football Club have ever scored, I suspect, the goal to Jefferson, because it came straight out of the centre.
Can't get much quicker than 15 seconds.
Well, how quick was it?
It was 15 seconds, I
yeah,
think.
exactly. That's what I mean.
You
Technically,
can't say
that's
you
why I
can't
picked
get
the top 30.
can't
There's probably someone.
It's probably quicker than that.
And then the very next centre clearances was that set shot miss that came out of the centre. The set shot miss from Sparrow. Beautiful mark, going back with the flight of the ball, one-handed. He really needed to kick that too. Like he's really an excellent set shot, so he's one of our better kicks for goals. But it's just really taking advantage of that momentum. That was a good example of when you don't kick it, you lose a little bit of that momentum. But really, I mean, it was brilliant third quarter. But you roll the dice, don't you? We could have scored a third one. We almost did on the next play, and then we fumbled it. Someone fumbled it and went straight up the other end. If you roll forward, you've got Windsor rolling forward for the handoff. You've got that sort of goal involves cheating. It involves players getting ahead of the contest, predicting or taking the punt that will win the ball. And if you don't, you're exposed the other way. So, as you know, we could set that up aggressively every time we do a ruck thing, but everyone would have to be pretty happy with giving up, 50% goals the other way. And so, of course, if you can engineer it, go for it, but it comes with the risk of – it's the same with taking on high risk to the corridor. We did a couple of times and we early on, and the first two that we did, we coughed up a goal. But if people want us to play transition footy, then we're going to give up goals on turnovers. It's going to happen. And if we were to set up really aggressively at every centre bounce and try to engineer those sorts of bang, bang, bang goals, well, then we'd have to also be prepared to be giving up plenty of goals the other way with midfields of the ilk of Green. And, so it was fantastic, though, and it really got the Irish jig going in the third quarter. And it was terrific. Yeah, it was great.
Wells 11 writes, JVR was one of the big disappointments on the day for me. I understand wet conditions, etc., but he just didn't look anywhere near it. I should have been given some time in the ruck to at least get him into the game. And I know we've been critical of JVR, but I also think that the wind and our disposal in the conditions were a bit of a factor here. The ball did sail over his fingers on a number of occasions. I don't know if that was him getting under the ball or the wind definitely things. So, George, we've talked about this a bit, so again, we probably don't need to go into too much detail. But do we give him a pass because of the conditions? Clearly not made for key tall forwards.
Yeah, a bit of everything. Like I said, he was coming back from injury and may well be still carrying that as well. So he'll be better for another week. And particularly, we'll get a good impression of it next week if we're playing under the roof at Marvel. We'll see the difference there.
Knowing our luck, there'll be a leak. I'll have to have the roof open. Roof won't be able to close and it'll piss down all day. How's that for MFCSS?
Yeah, that's
getting into the mechanical workings of the mechanicals of the roof at Marvel Stadium. Let's talk about Fritsch because we've alluded to this, so let's get stuck into this. Ross Millen asks, what did you think of Fritsch in his 150th? Are you concerned with his recent form? D. Old Farts adds, welcome back, guys. As always, I'm really looking forward to tonight's pod. I understand the logic behind playing Fritter further up the ground, but I'm not sure we can afford to play our best goal kicker away from goals. I'd love to hear your views on the long-term prospect of this move. Doug Reamer says he's a massive elephant in the room. Binman using AFL tables. These are his last 11 home and away games. 13 goals, 11 tackles, 9 1%ers, 3.3 marks a game. Only 9 of his 37 marks contested. Absolute liability. The harsh words there. Well, first, congratulations to Bailey on 150 games, our 6-goal grand final hero. Let's not forget that. Bimman, in terms of Bailey's recent form, if we're going to delve into 2024 and technically it falls under recent forms, is this trend to worry? Wet conditions in this game aside.
Look, I'm a huge Bailey Fritsch fan. I'm a huge Fritter fan. I mean, and, he's been our leading goal scorer for 5 seasons in a row. I mean, that's historically.
You got to remember that. You got to remember that too, as well.
Yeah, and so it is a worry. It totally is a worry, and I personally think his best position is the role Jefferson was playing, is leading out of the goal square. they've got him playing basically as a half forward, and he's played that sort of role before. Remember, he also Goody played him at halfback flank when at one stage where I think to sort of as part of his development, I suspect, but also getting into the game. He felt like he was carrying an injury for me last season. His defensive intensity wasn't where it needed to be. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago in the first pod, is that his goal scoring directly correlates with his tackling. Like if you look at the years he's had the most tackles, it correlates when he's kicked the most goals. So the two aren't, the two are intertwined, I think. I think it is a worry. And he didn't have a great game. He was a little bit better in that last quarter. I don't know whether he's down on confidence, but he's now one of our, if you're going to say he's almost historically, important, five seasons in a row, he's kicked the most goals. He's a senior player. A big difference between how we rolled and how they rolled is, 40 metres out, Green kicks a goal, which I never thought he was going to miss. Didn't even cross my mind. And I'm not comparing Bailey Fritsch to Fritter, but everyone talks about how silky his skills are. He went for a kick in that last quarter to JVR. JVR was in the middle of three Giants players. Great if it comes off, but it was not the right choice to kick in the conditions or at the point of the match. And I don't understand why he didn't have a shot for goal. He could have run inside. He was already inside 50. He kicked that ball from 40. Fritter, when he's up and about playing in his best, he kicks that goal. He kicks it, and he could have kicked it over those four players into the goal square and let it slid through on the slippery grass and go for a goal. I couldn't believe it. He went for that kick and didn't go for goal.
And the other thing, you may not have noticed it, but we had a player 15 or 20 metres out all on their own.
In the pocket?
No, right directly in front, and he's kicked it on JVR's head.
Yeah, and JVR also wasn't great. Just wasn't the right option, and it just feels like he's lost a little bit of confidence. I just don't know that high half forward suits him. He was a little bit more physical in that last quarter, but to be fair, he wasn't. And I noticed that the player ratings, they're particularly useful when comparing players playing similar role, because they've all got the same advantages and disadvantages in terms of the way they calculate their scores. And so, for example, this is Fritter's ratings for the match compared to our other half forwards. So I've compared him to Sparrow, Chandler, Henderson and Sharp, who all played equivalent sort of half forward flank positions. Fritter had a match rating of 4.4. He was negative 1.8 in the second quarter and 0.8 in the first quarter, 3.5 in the third quarter, and an okay last quarter, 1.9. By way of comparison, Tom Sparrow had 14.3. Now, Fritter is one of our senior players. In a big game, we need a better performance than that. Cade Chandler, I was shocked with this number, but it just goes to me, that's one of the things I like about these sorts of the player ratings. His player rating was 12.2, which is well over his career average. Jack Henderson in his first game of footy, 10.1. Sharp, I was surprised, actually. I thought he had a better game, just at least from my visuals, 4.4. So, of the four half-forward flankers, Fritter was, Sparrow, Chandler and Henderson were all, better than, played a better game than him. And he's the senior player in that mix, and same with Sharp. So, yes, the short answer is it does worry me. And he, as I said, I think earlier in the show, he's got a lot of credits in the bank, but he's spending those credits pretty quick. And if he doesn't perform next week, I could well and truly see him getting dropped. Particularly when Melksham comes back and Spargo, I think both of those players are competing for that spot. And he either takes Jefferson's role at leading out, or he might find himself out of the side, I think.
All right, let's get into changes for the North Melbourne game. And as it stands, we haven't received a medical report on the severity of Stephen May's fractured larynx that he sustained at training out at Casey last week. Max had a similar injury just prior to Christmas, which required surgery and 4 to 6 weeks of no contact. So you'd assume that he's not available this week or the next couple of weeks at best.
But he did say it's not anywhere near as serious, and that he's a chance in that video in his kitchen.
A chance as in next week.
Yeah, he's a chance next week, he said.
But in his post-match interview, he did say he's unlikely.
Yeah,
No,
they wouldn't. They
definitely.
won't risk him. Will they?
Anyway,
think so.
having said that, Tom McDonald, I'm not worried. He's slipped in, but we'll get into about this question coming up. The only player on the injury list that's listed as a test or near return is Hall, but I doubt we'll see him play this week. The rest of the players that are on the injury list, Melksham, McVie, Cully and Tolstrup are all 2, 3, 4 and at least 6 weeks away respectively. Cozzy, of course, not available until round 4 due to suspension, so I doubt we'll see anyone come back from off the injury list. Just before we went to air, we did receive the news that debutant Aidan Johnson has been handed a one-match ban for rough contact on Callum Brown, and that rules him out for the match against North. So I guess, well, we don't know if we can appeal
Andy,
that.
Sorry, just to interrupt. Did Chandler get reported? I thought there was talk about him getting reported as well.
I didn't see anything. Clary for tripping got a fine, a $2,000 fine, and I didn't see anything about Chandler.
Good.
So I doubt that he did get anything. The rules, as I said, that rules for the moment out of the North clash. So do we call up Tom Campbell, who's already faced North in the practice match? He did a good job. Or do we just go JVR as the second ruck? Any other changes this week that you can see? George, you start, followed by B-Man.
It's going to be a hard one based on that information, isn't it? The good news is that, from one perspective, is that North have only got one ruck effectively in Sherry. In the game against the Dogs, they played Darling, and Darling was absolutely, utterly, completely hopeless. If there's ever a player earning his superannuation, it's him at the moment.
It could be famous last words when he kicks 5.
Yeah.
We'll wait for that. He did some pretty good things. He kicked a couple of goals, didn't he? And he worked up the ground.
He was absolutely dead on his feet, particularly in the last quarter.
I don't like where this is going.
Yeah.
This is a kiss of death.
We'll kick him back into form. Don't worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah, the difficult thing is, what is the real situation with JVR? Normally, if AJ isn't available, then you go, well, we'll use JVR in the ruck. But if he's not up to that, then who else do we use? Do we put Petty back in there again as the cutout? You're just going around in circles again. So, if that's the option, maybe Tom Campbell does come in as an option off the bench or something like that. I don't know. Too hard to say. It was interesting. Do we talk about North Melbourne as in the game itself? Apart from
we got the previews at North. This is just purely changes at the moment.
Okay. Other than that, I really can't see any changes. Spargo is a possible, if it depends on whether they bite the bullet with Fritsch up the forward line, as has been suggested. Spargo.
What happened with Casey this week? Was there a practice match or something?
They had a I think they some scratch match or something like that. Yeah. And I think Spargo was available.
Spargo played, yeah.
Yeah, so he's really about the only one that you, in terms of positional needs, he's probably about the only one who's available.
And if he's fit, I reckon he's best 22, Spargo. I know that's a big call with him not playing last year.
But he's missed a lot of footy.
He's missed a lot of footy, but we desperately need his kicking skills, his smarts. Yeah. He's one of the few players who can kick those balls on the angle, and we need small forwards. And running like I think he's going to be an important player. They won't rush him back, but if he's anywhere near fit, I could see him coming into the side. I reckon, it's a pretty straightforward. They won't pick May. Why would you take a risk? I don't want to downplay. I think this is a really, really important match, and I'm not taking the Roos lightly. We'll talk about it in a sec, but I did watch that game against the Dogs, but and they were physical. They'll be desperate to come at us hard. I think the obvious is there's no way Campbell played. Well, not no way. I don't think Campbell will play. And as it turns out, I was right about T-Mac.
Well,
last minute in.
You somehow arranged a hit to the throat to get him into the team. But I mean, we like him. I
love it, and I won my bet that he would play. So
it seems like he's not in the picture. If you've got May,
he's in my picture,
and Petty. I know he's in your picture, and I love him. I think he did a great job, and I'm happy to have him in the team. But he's fourth in that pecking order. So if
Well-
those three are fit, he's not playing.
We'll see. Total
He's
no-brainer. Well, like it might have been Ducks and Drakes because they obviously knew May had done a larynx. So, like he didn't do a larynx on the morning of the football.
No, he
game,
did it
but
on
he did
Thursday.
it
Whenever they trained at Casey.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
he did it on Thursday. The game was on Sunday.
But having said that, didn't we had a captain's run, and was he reported, George, as being there? So maybe he didn't realise the severity of it. I'm sure he's a tough guy.
So it can't be
Stephen
that
May. We all
serious,
know
can
that
it?
he would have copped it in there. No, but also he copped a thing and felt a bit sore and was playing Mr. Macho as he does because that's the type of guy he
So
is.
in any
I
case,
love him
they
for
knew
it.
it happened on Thursday, so they knew it was a good chance he wasn't playing, obviously. So T-Mac was always in that frame, always going to play.
Yeah, well, of course. Well, I'm saying a week out of the game, he wasn't in the frame.
Maybe we don't know what their thinking was last week. In any case, this week it's an obvious Turner will come in. JVR, maybe Turner will do some rucking. He did a bit last year, remember, and JVR will do some rucking. Turner in is the obvious one. AJ
Jefferson
out. Unfortunately,
AJ out,
really
sorry,
unfortunate for AJ, really timing-wise. So that's obvious. The real query I have will be who they use for sub. Surely they won't make Lindsay sub. I really hope they bring. I hope Langford starts next week. I don't want him being a subs 2 weeks in a row under the perfect conditions of the with the roof at Marvel. I hope he plays. The lack of space will be won't disadvantage his lack of speed. The how tight that ground is. So I really hope that they don't start him. But I don't know, George, Andy, if he isn't the sub. If there's only the one change, Sharp, maybe Sharp. Yeah. Maybe Sharp, bring him on third quarter, extra run. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so I reckon just the one change. AJ out, Turner in.
Well, both teams lost their first round matches this week and will be eager to open their 2025 accounts. The D's lost by, as we know, the 3 points to the Giants and the Kangaroos by 16 points to an undermanned Dogs. And just over 3 weeks ago, an undermanned D side overran an almost full-strength Kangaroos outfit in the heat of Arden Street by 46 points. And Scroll says, looks like Stephen May will have a stint on the sidelines with a fractured larynx. Who do you think will play on the Kangaroos tools in Larkey and Darling? We're lucky to have someone like T-Mac who can seamlessly slot in. And Red Jacket says, our match against a hungry and improved Kangaroos, particularly early in the year, scares the bejesus out of me. If we lose this game and fall to 0-2, will it be panic stations? So, B-Man, followed by Georgia, your previews or thoughts on this upcoming game?
It won't be panic stations. It'll be bloody mini disaster, though. Maybe that's close to panic stations. Maybe panic stations is like a stop on the way to mini disaster. This is a must-win game. I talked a lot last season before about games aren't. Early season games aren't some sort of test on where you are, but we can't afford to drop this game if it is the one that comes back and haunts you. I can't see us going into it complacent. There's no chance of that. No chance. They did. I watched that game. Do you watch the game, George? That Dogs Roos game?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Their play, look, this would be my assessment. The Roos playing like almost an old school meat and potatoes game of footy.
Absolutely agree. Yeah.
Clearly trying to drill into them contest first. Pressure, contest, tackle, smash in. Defensively, they don't really use a zone in the way which, them and Port are the two clubs at the moment who don't seem to be using a modern zone, which doesn't really impact on the at Marvel in the way it does on bigger grounds because it's obviously smaller and the pockets are tighter. The Dogs were seriously undermanned, and the Dogs killed them for the first half. But I have to say the Roos' effort and physicality was super impressive in the third quarter and fourth quarter. They got some genuinely good players running through that team, and what's his name? starts with S. Simpkin.
Sheasel or Simpkin.
Diesel is just an absolute gun. God, he's a fantastic player. They're loaded. They've got some really good players. Simpkin was excellent in that game. I thought, Darling was physical. He got up and down the ground. But I take George's point. He's certainly no Usain Bolt. That's for sure. Larky will always trouble us, and I think May will miss May's strength. T-Mac's not brilliant one-on-one, although I thought he did pretty well on the weekend. But Petty might go to him. Petty's marking was back to his very best, I thought, by the way.
Rippers.
I don't think we'll do the chip around. I'm really fascinated about this game, and I think one of the things that Goody's done is I've talked about this a lot. He has underestimated how tactically sharp he is, and I think he's trying to build a method that's adaptable to different conditions and different opponents. And I think he's moving away from the D's play this way, and everyone else has to respond to that, to being a little bit more. The game plan being a bit more dependent on circumstances. And that's what I think he's trying to drill in now, which is what that chipping it around is all about. I don't think we'll do that as much against, we'll still do a little bit against the Roos, but the Roos don't have the same threat on transition as the Giants, obviously, but they're not playing a particularly fast brand of transition footy, as George noted about the practice game. So I expect us to play a faster transition game and really look to push and move the ball downfield. So I'm really looking for us to win handsomely from defensive win on turnover, to be really quite aggressive with our ball movement. So I'm hoping that that's what we'll see, and be quite attacking, score high, over 100 points, and really put the asset on them. But we'll be looking for the contest. I think one of the things I really liked about the weekend was our contest was fantastic. Our pressure was fantastic, and their enthusiasm and energy. I don't know if you guys noticed it, but players were really looking like they were enjoying playing footy. And I expect us to bring that energy to this game and really look to physically attack the Roos, who will also look to physically attack us and go hard at it. I just think, they're not going to beat us in a brawl, and we'll beat them in the transition game. And I expect that we'll win and win well. But I'm 100% not downplaying what the Roos could bring. If we lose, it is a really bad sign, I think.
Totally agree there, Ben. We all went to see the Roos practice match previously, and while it's only a practice match, or I don't think it was even designated as with that name, I think we saw a fairly good indication of what both teams will bring this season. Bin Man's absolutely right. During that that game, we were doing chipping around, and then 5 seconds later, we're doing the fast, quick ball movement. We were deciding what we will do when we need to do it. So you'll see a fair bit of that sort of transition, not just in this coming game, but over the whole season. The Roos, again, in the practice match, and I think it's exactly what Clarkson is trying to do. He's trying to keep control. The last thing he needs with a side that's in the transition from the bottom reaches of the ladder is to be blown out by 100 points.
Yeah.
So they're about the chip and hold a lot, which will create turnovers and will create errors that we will exploit.
And makes for a messy game.
And it does, yeah. But that's what they're playing at the moment. They don't have the capability or the runners at the moment to be able to implement the fast movement type game. They've got great skilled players individually, but they don't work together yet. Simpkin and Sheasel and McKercher and Wardlaw all will be fantastic players in the years to come, but they're just not there yet. So they've got a single ruck in Sherry. He had 51 hit-outs in the game against the Bulldogs, and that's against Tim English. So that was a fairly good indication.
An excellent ruck.
He is, yeah, but he has to do it all on his own. Darling, as the second ruck, had a grand total of 1 hit-out in the whole game. So that sort of tells you it's either all or nothing with North. But then equally, if AJ's not available in this game, it'll be Max or nothing, so to speak. So, Comden, I think their other backman, came off with a really bad injury by the looks of things. He wasn't mentioned in the injuries list. So it'll be interesting to see whether he comes up this week. Larkey is a fantastic forward. I think we'll put Petty on him because Petty's much more mobile to be able to hold him down, so to speak. But yeah, they're coming up as a team, but they've got a long way to go. But yeah, we simply cannot afford to lose this game. And the good thing is that we took what I think is the best side in the competition to within 3 points, no matter what the condition were. I think we'll do a lot better against a team that's, while they've got the talent, is still going to be struggling in the bottom half of the ladder come the end of the season.
Yeah, and I reckon it's, as much as I'm not thrilled with playing at Marvel, I think it's perfect time for us to be playing a game at Marvel because it gives us a chance to, without the sort of conditions being a factor, to really sort of practice and drill down the way we want to play. So I'm really looking forward to the game in terms of getting a really good look against a team that, that we're not looking necessarily to really work hard to negate their sort of mitigate their strengths. We'll play the game on our terms. So I think we'll get a really good look at the way Goody wants to play this year, which will always be pressure, will always be the contest, but look for faster ball movement in this game and looking to get a Jefferson out in the open and looking to get Fritters, to bring some of those players into it where we can use our skills. And I'm really looking forward to it. Can't wait.
Well, if we do lose an 0-2 and facing Gold Coast early in the year when they're always up and about, and then guess where we're travelling after Gold Coast?
If we lose this match, Andy, I'm going to join the MFCSS club.
Well, you didn't answer my question. Guess where we're travelling after Gold Coast? Our favourite place in the world.
Where are we travelling after Gold Coast?
Geelong. Friday night at Pork Barrel Stadium.
At Taxpayer Park.
Looking at an 0-4. How's that for a prospect?
How are we going to get through 24 games this season, Andy?
I'm just giving you all the time. You've all missed the MFCSS. I'm just bringing it back with a vengeance.
I reckon we'll smash through. So how's that for a bit of positivity? 112 points to 73.
I like. Although I think that's conceding too many.
Okay, all right, 114 points to 57.
All right, that's a bit better. All right, guys, I think we're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week to break down our game against the Kangaroos. If you want to listen to the show live as it happens, please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 7:30 p.m. And thank you to our 5-star reviewers on Apple Podcasts. That's a thank you to Red and Blue Ripper and Maxed Out. Thank you to our voicemailers, Salty, Roadstar and Flower Magic. And as always, your questions and comments are an integral part of the show. So thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments tonight. Thank you to El Diablo, Jane02, Track Forever, Mandy Lorian, Lazy, Monocular, Tolstoy's Nudge, Bigfoot, What, Say What, Damo, BW511, Singer, D, Rev, Smurf, Lefty, Delightful Play, Demonized, Pew Pew Pew, Wells 11, Ross Millen, D Old Fart, Doug Reamer, Scroll, and Red Jacket. And thank you to my co-host George and Binman, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget, leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, and we'll read it out on the next show. Give you that shout out. Go Demons!
Go Red Leggers!
Come on, Demons! Come on!